I will tell you of Niord and the worm. You have heard the tale before, in many guises, wherein the hero was named Tyr, or Perseus, or Siegfried, or Beowulf, or St. George. But it was Niord who met the loathly demoniac thing that crawled hideously up from hell, and from which meeting sprang the cycle of hero tales that revolves down the ages until the very substance of the truth is lost and passes into the limbo of all forgotten legends. I know whereof I speak, for I was Niord. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm your host, Jason Aiken. In this week's episode, I'm going to be discussing The Valley of the Worm by Robert E. Howard. The passage I read at the beginning of the episode is from the opening of The Valley of the Worm, and kind of sets the stage for this short story. The Valley of the Worm first appeared in the February 1934 issue of Weird Tales. I read it in the Best of Robert E. Howard, Volume 1, Red Shadows, published by Del Rey Books. If you're a Robert E. Howard fan, you owe it to yourself to try and acquire the entire Del Rey Robert E. Howard library. Del Rey really set a new standard for producing mass-market sword and sorcery collections with the Robert E. Howard titles. The Del Rey series has the preferred Robert E. Howard text, along with bonus material from Robert E. Howard scholars, but it also has fantastic new artwork. The Best of Robert E. Howard Volume 1, Crimson Shadows, is fully illustrated by Jim and Ruth Keegan. I first discovered their work in the Dark Horse Conan comics. Their strip, The Adventures of Two Gun Bob, appears in every issue of the Robert E. Howard comics, usually at the bottom of the letters column. I'm a big fan of the strip. Jim and Ruth were kind enough to allow me to use their unpublished painting of Niord and the Worm on the episode title card. As usual, I think the two completely nailed it. You can see more of their work on their Two Gun blog, which I'll link to in the show notes. Now, The Valley of the Worm is one of Howard's James Allison reincarnation tales. I previously discussed Marchers of Valhalla, another James Allison story, in an earlier episode of Pulp Crazy. The Valley of the Worm has a dying and depressed James Allison, recalling his past life as a warrior. In this tale, he's Niorm, later referred to as Niorm Worm-bane, an Aesir warrior. It seems like the Valley of the Worm may take place during the Hyborian Age, or possibly following it. The tale begins with Niord and his tribe traveling south into northern Africa. In Africa, they come across a clan of Picts who have migrated there as well. The two groups do battle, with the Aesir being victorious. In a rare moment of mercy, Niord spares a Pict named Grom. Grom recuperates with the Aesir, but eventually leaves to return to his tribe. When he comes back to the Aesir, Grom brings the chieftains of his tribe, and peace is struck between the two peoples. Everything's going pretty good, so good that some of the younger Aesir break off from the main tribe to settle in a nearby valley. Unknown to them, this valley is quite dangerous. It's the titular Valley of the Worm. Needless to say, things don't work out well for this group, and it's up to Niord to avenge them. There's actually two dangerous creatures that inhabit the Valley of the Worm that Niord has to go up against. Sotha, a giant snake with foot-long poisonous fangs, is only the least of Niord's worries. For in the valley, or the ruins of an ancient city. Beneath the city's temple rests a dangerous creature, the worm. Now, the creature is called a worm, as that's the closest creature that it can be described as. I did not take it that it was a literal worm. In reality, this creature has more in common with Lovecraft's Shoggoth. The creature is very Lovecraftian in its description. It's treated as a god by this weird, shaggy-haired Pied Piper that's a humanoid creature that seems to worship it. I guess technically you could say, counting the shaggy-haired Pied Piper creature that worships the worm, there's really 3 weird creatures in the Valley of the Worm. I'm not going to go into any more detail about the plot, but that's basically what the Valley of the Worm is about. There's a lot more to it than that, as Howard was just a phenomenally gifted writer. One almost has to wonder if it was Robert E. Howard channeling his own past lives and describing them as Allison's. The atmosphere, the detail, it's just all so incredibly well done. The passage where he describes the extinction of the saber-toothed tiger is a particularly compelling part of the story, in my opinion. I also love how, as he did in the Conan stories, seamlessly combines heroic fiction with a Lovecraftian creature. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can purchase The Best of Robert E. Howard Volume 1, Crimson Shadows. But I'll also post a link to the online e-text that's up at Project Gutenberg Australia. Apparently, the Valley of the Worm is in the public domain in Australia. The Valley of the Worm has also been adapted into 2 comic book stories. The first was adapted by Jerry Conway, Roy Thomas, and Gil Kane in Supernatural Thrillers number 3 from Marvel Comics. I think it's a great adaptation. You can read it for free on the Savage Tales blog that I'll link to in the show notes. The only thing I didn't like is the appearance of the worm. It's not very Lovecraftian. The Valley of the Worm was also adapted by Richard Corbin and released as Bloodstar. Wikipedia says this is possibly the first publication to refer to itself as a graphic novel. Apparently, it's Howard's original tale reimagined and expanded into a post-apocalyptic setting. I've never read it, but I'm a big fan of Corbin's artwork, and I'll have to keep an eye out for it. And the depiction of the creature on the cover looks pretty Lovecraftian to me. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is located at youtube.com/pulpcast. You can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Please follow, like, subscribe, or drop me an email if you're enjoying the show, or have any feedback for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.